June 14th, 2023, other guilty plea, restaurant owner. A Minnesota restaurant owner pleads guilty in a related feeding our future fraud kickback scheme, wire fraud, restitution ordered. That's from Reddit. 2024 trials and mixed verdicts. On June 7, 2024, jury trial verdicts. First major federal trial, a jury convicts 5 of 7 defendants on wire fraud, money laundering charges. 2 defendants are acquitted, from Reddit. All right. And now we are on to this recent year, 2025. Convictions, guilty pleas, and new indictments. January 24th, 2025, major sentencing. So Mohammed Sharif is sentenced to 210 months, 17.5 years for his role in the feeding our future fraud after a June 2024 trial conviction on conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering counts. Restitution order. That's from the IRS. All right. And we have 2 more Somalians that were convicted. This one's on March 19th, 2025. Convictions at trial. Feeding Our Future founder, Amy Block. Block, I believe. Yep. Amy Block. This is the alleged ringleader of the operation. And Salem Saeed are convicted on all counts at trial. Dates prior, DOJ. Press reported. This is from Wikipedia. We have 4 Somalians that were convicted on August 4th, 2025. Additional guilty pleas, of course, as it says right here. Plead guilty to charges in the scheme. This brings the conviction count to over 50 pleas so far in the case. That's reported from the IRS. All right. Now, August 7th, 2025. Landmark sentencing. Sharif Farah is sentenced to 28 years in prison, the longest sentence handed down in the Feeding Our Future fraud prosecutions, in order to pay approximately $48 million in restitution. Wow, insane. And and lastly, to finish it off, November 24th, 2025, 78th defendant charged. U.S. Attorney's Office files an indictment charging Biloxi Doyle as the 78th defendant in the Feeding Our Future fraud scheme. That's from the Department of Justice. So right now, I got some statistics up here. So as you know, 78 people in total have been arrested and charged, and we have 59 convictions. Major sentences include 28 years Farah and 17.5 years Sharif. All right. And now let's get over to exactly when did the FBI know about this? Of course, so the FBI involvement came in 2021. State flag suspicion claims FBI begun probe. Of course, that's from PolitiFact. The indictments, initial group of defendants charged, later expanded to dozens more on Reddit. Trials and pleas 2023 to 2025, mixed results, many guilty pleas, multiple convictions at trial, and numerous sentencing hearings. That's from the IRS. And continued prosecutions. Additional indictments and plea agreements, high profile long prison sentences. That's from that's in 2025. So all right, so we've gone all over everything right there. Now let's get back into this. Now we are done with Ilhan Omar. Now we're going to get into one of the reporters who broke this fraud scheme that took place in Minnesota.
I am shocked, and I know a lot of people that are watching will be shocked to hear that there's fraud in a government program. But starting from, say, the 30,000 foot level, give us an overview. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so there is a massive problem with systemic fraud in the state of Minnesota when it comes to government welfare programs. We're talking about billions of dollars that have been defrauded in recent years. The situation has gone so bad that there are entire government programs where the U.S. Attorney's Office has indicated the fraud outstrips the legitimate claims. When it comes to the fraud rings that have been exposed to date, these crimes have been heavily concentrated in Minnesota's Somali community, and this has kind of been an open secret in the state for quite some time. But something that progressive politicians, kind of progressive media, was really loath to admit in terms of what was going on. And then as part of our investigation at City Journal, we spoke to a number of political sources, law enforcement sources, counterterrorism sources, and people indicated to us that millions of dollars in stolen American taxpayers have been sent abroad, and that some of this money had inadvertently ended up in the hands of Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda affiliate.
Well, inadvertently, perhaps, right? I mean, because those that are siphoning.
Like I mentioned earlier, there are the connections that are there. Ian Omar is going off on air and say there's no connections to where there is possible terrorist funding. They are there. And she says there's not on file. And some of these news agencies that are running cover that are saying there's no connections at all, like lost track of my thoughts right there. Sorry about that. But I mean, like some of these news agencies that are running cover and saying that there is no possible connection to Al-Shabaab, there is connections right there. And like this guy's about to go over and explain to you how this is the case, because he's one of the first ones that broke this, one of the whistleblowers. We also have, I should have brought up the other one too as well. He's on X, but of course, if there's more, we're probably going to cover this more, honestly speaking, because this seems like it's not going to die down probably for like another week or so, because there's no telling how many people are involved in this fraud scheme.
Off this money and then sending it back to Somalia. We don't, I'm assuming, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming we don't really know their intent or motivations. And so some of those individuals may well have known that Al-Shabaab would then be taking a portion of this money. They would be taking basically a tax on that money.
That's fair to say. I wouldn't be able to prove, we didn't include it in our article, the claim that, yes, this money was specifically defrauded with the express purpose of fundraising for Al-Shabaab. We can't justify that claim, but regardless, we can't rule it out as a possibility. And the bottom line is either way, Al-Shabaab's getting a cut, whether or not they're intending for that to be the case or not.
Right. No, I appreciate the objectivity there. You don't see that very often. So what are we talking about in terms of dollars? Do we know yet?
So we don't know the total dollar figure here. There are whistleblowers in the DHS in Minnesota who say, it could be as bad as 6.5 billion. But I think what's safe to say is we're talking about billions of dollars. And on numerous occasions, the U.S. Attorney's Office has indicated, these three major fraud rings that have been exposed to date, we're talking about $1 billion there. And when it comes to the true scope of the fraud, it is in the billions. But in terms of, what is the exact final dollar figure going to be here, we don't currently know. We might not ever know.
And there's so many questions here to ask, Ryan, so I apologize if I seem to be all over the map here. But, but again, kind of looking at a distance and saying, okay, tell us the infrastructure of this. When does it appear that this started? Is there a way to say, look, it appears as if this scheme, although I don't know that scheme gives it a fair enough sort of context, but when did it start?
Well, I mean, fraud in government welfare programs would have been going on for, decades. I'm sure.
Wait, I've got my shock face on again. Hold on, we have to get some time.
It's certainly a long-standing problem, but at least what sources told me was that they felt like it started to get much worse around 2010. Not to the kind of crisis level that we've reached now, but things had started to pick up a bit of steam. And then I think a real kind of critical moment is COVID, where you just have more money flying out the door than ever before. And you have some of these programs that are, specifically designed to have very few guardrails under the, idea that, look, it's an emergency. We have to have low barriers to entry. We've got to get money into the hands of people who need it. So the programs, when you take a look at them, some of them almost seem to have been specifically designed in order to facilitate fraud. And so I think the fraud predates COVID, but then it accelerates in that point in time. And it continues.
Yeah, I have heard some comments. I think they're probably initial comments from Representative Ilhan Omar. And I believe they were yesterday, at some point in the past day or two, she was addressing this issue. And her response, which was very wordy, was essentially, well, it was the pandemic, and essentially saying what you're saying. We had no guardrails because, we had to work so quickly. And I'm thinking, you can work quickly, and you can work efficiently, and you can work effectively. Those things are not mutually exclusive, right? But, and again, I'm not saying that that's an uncommon response from government. And I think the problem here will be that when you talk about something like this, defrauding the taxpayers, fraud within the government programs, there's a danger, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a danger that people just roll their eyes and go, well, of course.
Yeah. I think that is, look, are we ever going to be able to completely stamp out fraud when it comes to government welfare programs? Likely not, but when we're talking on the level that we are here, billions of dollars over the course of a handful of years, like this is a 5-alarm fire in the state of Minnesota, and Minnesotans should be utterly outraged. Like, they have been failed by their government officials, by the people who are supposed to keep their eyes on the public purse. They have been exploited by their fellow residents in the state. And, ultimately this money, we can talk about whether or not government welfare is, what we think about that politically, but this money was earmarked for, people who had some needs. And as a result, those needs went unmet, and the taxpayer still got hit with a bill, and it went to fund, lavish lifestyles and luxury vehicles and real estate purchases in Africa and across America.
Yeah, no, look, I agree that the programs themselves, setting up these programs, the needs are very legitimate, right? And yet, before I go down that road, you mentioned that the people of Minnesota should be outraged. Do you get the sense that they are?
I get the sense that there is, a lot of anger in the state. Now, I can't speak for everyone, but I've been, pretty consistently working the phones since this story broke, keeping in touch with the contacts that I've developed to try and, get a sense of what they're hearing and what the situation is on the ground. I also spent time in Minnesota while reporting this piece, and, I definitely think that a lot of the people I'm speaking to, at least, are, one, outraged